Good afternoon and Hoopy Friday to everybody. It is Celtic State of Mind's last bulletin of the week, although we do have the match coverage coming up at the weekend. Paul John Dykes is off conducting Acsom business, very secretive, top secret Acsom business at the moment, which he doesn't tell us about. We're mere plebs. But that means that you're stuck with me in the hot seat again. But I am joined by the ever excellent Brian Degnan. It's been a wee while since we've been on together, Brian. And, for those that don't know, Brian was actually the very first Acsomer that I had a pint with up at Grays's at a trust meeting when we first met. And we've got on well ever since. But yeah, Brian, delighted to have you on, and it's how good is it to be on a bulletin the day after a European game away in Europe and celebrating not just a win, but a really convincing and emphatic win as well. Actually, when you look at the scoreline, it was a great performance last night. Tell us what you've made of it.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. I thought it was absolutely excellent last night, and it's nice. It's nice to a bit of positivity on a Friday as well. It's nice to wake up with a smile about Celtic and be looking forward and have a lot to celebrate and talk about. So I always like to try and be positive on a Friday, but the past few Fridays have been difficult, but this should be good. But in terms of the game itself, last night I thought we were excellent last night. Really, really good. I would have been content with just a solid performance, if I'm honest. I think that when you look at the Michelin game, we were battered. It was a 3-1 tanking, really. And I think it was disappointing that it could have been a lot more. I think we probably escaped with a 3-1. Whereas so last night going into the game, I thought, right, away from home in Europe, just a bit of pride, bit of fight, see how we got on. Let's be proud of the performance, and then whatever the result is, we'll see where we're at. I think it's Europe's been a funny one this season, isn't it? Because it was sort of tinged with disappointment from the start after the Kairat game, and I think it's not been as inspiring in terms of the fixture list, etc. And then obviously performances. But last night was what you want from Celtic in Europe. I thought we were really, really brave on the ball, which is probably the most pleasing. Especially given the fact that we know the squad isn't where it needs to be. Like you've got Luke McCowan starting right wing, and God bless him, he does his best every game. His best isn't he probably great, but he tries things. He gives his all for it. You had Jang, who's the much maligned Jang playing.
Mm.
So when you look at it, you go, this could be tight. But no, I think front to back, we were really, really impressive, really brave on the ball, really spirited, a lot of fight. And I think the most pleasing thought overall was the fact that going down relatively early to a
Yep.
goal, the reaction was absolutely excellent. And it maybe actually helped us because it almost took the brakes off a little bit, I think, and sort of relieved pressure because well, look, we're getting beat 1-0 now. We really need to do this, or we're going to get battered. And we took the bull by the horns. And I know we're going to talk about some of the players individually, performances and things like that, and of course Mark O'Neill. But overall thoughts, delighted with the game, really, really good. And it's probably the most I've enjoyed a European game since probably Munich away was
Mm.
really the last time I actually enjoyed watching us in Europe, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it was interesting last night. I covered the match along with Stephen and Ryan. And it was it was a little bit surreal towards the end. We actually got a few pelters, people saying, cheer up, lads, we've won a game in Europe. And it wasn't a case of, we've got some ridiculous comment about not celebrating because we don't want to alienate any fans. It's like, it's not how we work, man. It's just not a thing. But the key thing was that we went into the game with, I wouldn't say low expectations, but we're trying to temper our expectations going into it, because we know the challenges we've had in Europe. We know the challenges we've got within the squad in terms of injuries, in terms of players, not necessarily being able to perform. And you're right, we're going to talk about maybe legacy when we talk about Martin O'Neill shortly. But when it got to the end of the game, it took a little bit of time for it to register that we've actually just won a game convincingly away from home in Europe against what is, and appreciate people will say Feyenoord have not been on great form themselves, but we're still talking about a top European side here in terms of pedigree. And as the cliche often says, there are no easy games in Europe. And it was an interesting one when we were watching it. It wasn't a game that I felt I was enjoying so much, rather than just observing and seeing what's happened. Once the game's finished and you go back and you reflect, you think, God, we actually there was a lot we did extremely, extremely well there, and you're trying very hard to be dispassionate about it, but then you can always think that was absolutely excellent. And the key thing that you've mentioned, which I think might tie into what we're going to talk about in terms of Martin O'Neill and what he's brought to the table since coming in, was the reaction to going to go down. How often this season, and even in past seasons, have we watched the team come up against some challenge or adversity during a match, whether it's losing a goal, losing a player, getting a red card, anything like that, events that don't go your way during a game. And you've almost seen a fragility within the squad where they have crumbled. We've not looked like we can react. And sometimes we lose a goal, we suddenly lose another one in quick succession, which we've seen because we can't seem to galvanise ourselves to get back onto the back on track. What we saw last night was, yes, we lost a goal, potentially a couple of individual errors, Tierney maybe trying to play the onside, Trusty being out of position. But we didn't let it get to us. The players, they just dusted themselves down, they got on with it, they got back up to back up the pitch, and we started to put Feyenoord under real pressure. And actually, you're looking at guys like Dyson Maeda, for example, who's been maligned this season, pushing and pressing the goalkeeper, forcing them into mistakes. You look at Rio Hatate, suddenly you're doing what we've all been begging him to do for.
I think you've frozen, Chris. I think we've lost double denim, or he's lost me. Someone's lost someone, but we'll carry on regardless. And I think it's Chris was just touching on there the fact that it was such an impressive performance for guys who maybe have struggled a bit with mentality or confidence and things, and I think that's absolutely right. And I think, and this is something we're going to come on to later, and it'd be good to get some comments on this, but I think that's really indicative of the Martin O'Neill effect in a lot of ways, because what you've got there is guys who are really motivated. And one observation I made in the game was we did have to pass back on occasion. We sort of to get repositioning, etc. But it was almost begrudgingly we passed back. We seemed to, you know, it wasn't a sort of chore. It wasn't an escape. It wasn't easy ball. It really just to regroup and then try and get it forward, try and get it forward, try and get it forward. And I think that you know is something that's really pleasing and something that I think most people would agree with was one of the most frustrating things about the Brendan Rodgers era. I think we've got Chris back now. Chris, we back, we live, we in the flesh. Nope, you're on mute. It's all right, you get there. In the end, we'll hear dulcet tones soon, Chris. Nope, you're still on mute. I'll carry on until we hear more from you. But yeah, as I'm saying, I think that when you look at the Brendan Rodgers era, a lot of the frustration was that sort of plodding, you know, back and forth, just possession for possession's sake. Whereas under Martin O'Neill, and I think last night exemplified it, especially when you consider the team we were playing against. It was considerably better, more direct and certainly more exciting. But let's get some of your thoughts as well. Bobby Sunderland, Ralston, Scales, and McCown are decent squad players, but nothing more. Do you know what? I totally disagree about Scales, and Chris and I were actually going to talk about that later, so maybe we take us back on. But in terms of Ralston and McCown, I think you're probably right. I think none of them are going to lead us forward. But what I would say is, if you look at McCown playing right wing last night, actually, he put in a shift. He really did give his all. And I think that when you're facing, we know, although we've got a weekend squad, we've got a lot of injuries coming up, you need guys like that in your team to really sort of give it their all. And what they can give might be limited, but they give it. And I think that they don't hide. I think that Ralston was quite reliable when he came on to replace Donovan, who I thought was excellent. Again, was something to talk about. Um, so yeah, I don't agree with Scales necessarily, and we'll talk about Scales in a bit more detail later. But yeah, Ralston McCown, I think you're right to say that squad players. Paddy Lavery in the chat, something always goes wrong when Chris is in charge of the pod. Paddy, you're probably right, but we'll let my way with it because the big man's still in a hole there. Um, Scott Dougal, I thought Arnie Engels played well last night. Yep, yep. Again, we're going to talk about that later on. I think you're absolutely right. And actually, Chris and I were texting, sort of just at the start of the game, and we both sort of said that big man Engels have been a defender of him, but I'm not sure how he's doing. He's went off the ball a wee bit, and then ended up, I think he was potentially man of the match or certainly a contender. So now that Chris is hopefully back, we'll get on to talk about him in more detail as well.
Do you have me? Can you hear me?
We're back. He's back in the room. Bill Denham's
Awesome.
back.
Had to
So
do a
Chris,
little
just
bit
to,
of a reboot there. Apologies, guys.
no, that's all right. I was rambling away here reading some of the comments, and I just some of the comments had mentioned Scales and Engels, who are two players obviously I think we're going to talk
Yeah.
about. But Paddy was just commenting, Paddy Lavery was just commenting that something always goes wrong when you're in charge, and
I'm blaming Paddy.
you're
Paddy
cursed.
always blames Jerry Taylor. I'm blaming Paddy because something always goes wrong whenever Paddy's on the chat. So that's what I'm going to say. But yeah, not sure what happened there. There was no indication there was any problems at my side. So apologies for that. But thanks to Brian for keeping the discussion going. So Brian, you mentioned there, talk about Scales, talk about Engels. These are guys who I think are, both being maligned for slightly different reasons. But we were talking before we came on, before we came live, about Scales and actually the fact that he's been one of the more consistent performers, even under the previous management. He's been one of the more consistent performers, a player who steps up. I think in the absence of Carter Vickers, he started to show his leadership qualities at the back as well. And it's been, just having that consistent, reliable presence at the back, I think has really benefited the team. But then you look at Engels, and Engels is a player who had pressure before he'd even, joined up with his teammates. Big transfer fee, a lot of expectation, maybe unfair perception that because of the timing that he came in, and with Matt O'Reilly going out, that they were trying to replace like for like. And I don't think Engels, I think it's very apparent now, Engels is a different type of player. And I'm going to drop Brian and myself in it here because last night during the game, we were on the group chat and early on in the game, we were actually bemoaning Engels. We're saying we want to see more from him. We felt as though he was playing too passively. Lo and behold, what happens as the game progresses and as the whole team grows into the game, Engels, I think, was one of the standouts in terms of that growth and really starting to get a grip on the game. Was evident in some of his defensive work as the game progressed. He was back there. He was helping out defensively. I think the system change, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Brian, as well. We went from that kind of 4-3-3 almost to a flat four in midfield. So suddenly you no longer had Callum McGregor as the pivot, but you had Engels in there doing his share of the work, and he was also getting up and feeding the attack. And I think that Alan Morrison and others will obviously, they can augment their argument with a lot of data. When we've got the eye test, I always think it's a good indication of how well a player is playing when you see a lot of him on the coverage. He's getting involved, he's heavily involved in the build-up, you see a lot, positive stuff. And I felt as though that exemplified Engels' performance last night. I thought it was one of the more mature and controlled performances that we've seen from him.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that so last season, I thought actually he had a pretty good season, all things considered. I think he was actually better in Europe than he was domestically, because I think he's he gets caught up in things a little bit domestically at times. I think he gets a bit frustrated, and he sort of, I don't think he likes the attention at times. I think he's fine with the physical side of it. I just don't think he particularly likes the lack of time in the ball maybe domestically. But Europe, I think he was pretty good in Europe, and I remember people were saying, "Oh, 11 million on him was a waste of money." But I would argue that last season he justified it because I think he was key to us in the Champions League. I think his physicality, his pace, his off the ball work was really, really strong. However, this season I think there's been times where he's looked as if he's in the wrong movie. He sort of looked. It's almost like when he's quiet, he's non-existent. He sort of flutters in and out, and because the team's been underperforming, I don't think he's the type of player that will. I think he sort of almost performs to the level of the team at times. I think the team's playing poor. I don't think he's the man to grab it and drag the team forward, and not every player's like that. Whereas I think when the players around him are playing a bit better, I think he starts to thrive. And actually, I think, there's an odd comparison with Trusty, and that I think actually when we're up against it a bit, he's better. And I think that last night, and again, this goes back to my point about him being good in Europe, I think last night he really covered a lot of ground. He'd really put himself about, really stopped attacks, really made it difficult for the final players. And I think he really, really helps McGregor when they sit a bit deeper. I think them as the two in midfield, whether that be
Yep.
as a pivot or as a flat floor, I think it really helps McGregor as well. So yeah, I was really impressed, and it was almost curse of the comment. This is why I don't do match coverage, because A, I get far too excited, and B, I'm prone to just saying crazy things, and that's evidence because I say I was messaging you like Engels. I don't know about the big man now. I'm starting my doubts, and then by the end of it, it's like, oh, what a performance, what a player, what a man. So that shows that I'm
I
like
tell you,
during
they will
games.
hang you on the match coverage. You say anything at pre-match or half-time, and then something else happens at
No,
full-time. You're like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. So yeah, it can be a minefield. But at the same time, you get the chance to enjoy and talk about the match and see the reaction of the fans at the end, which is quite good. There's a great example now. We often take a wee bit of criticism after the match. People say, you're not celebrating enough, or guys, why are you happy? That wasn't a great performance. And what I want to illustrate to a couple of people, and just because it's quite a funny point, is probably the best example was actually the game against St Mirren. So, as you'll know, Brian, when we join the podcast, we get a little green room icon at the bottom so we can see who's joined, and we're not live, but we can see people on camera. So, as it's getting to full time on the game against St Mirren, and it's not been a great performance. I'm slumped in my chair. I'm as far back as you can possibly go watching this, thinking, God, what are we going to talk about? The fans are going to be unhappy. The commenters are not going to be happy. How do we break this down? And then I've got you've got Paul John there, and I've got Sean there, so I can see them at the bottom. And we're all looking equally miserable, right? So we're all looking pretty down in the dumps. And then, of course, we get the moment with Callum McGregor scoring that absolute worldly goal. And honestly, now you've got to bear in mind this was 4 a.m. Sean's time, right? And I believe his wife and his kid were in bed. And all you can see is Sean jumping, diving off his chair. Now my coverage is not caught up at this point, because obviously in all different time zones. So he's jumping, and I'm like, "Have we scored? Have we scored?" Sean's dancing on camera and all this thing. Paul John's up, and he's gonna, and then score the goal. And I'm like, this. And of course, this is right. This is about seconds before we're due to go live. Less than a minute before we're due to go live. You've got to try and compose yourself. So honestly, as much as we try and find the right emotion and the right way to talk about games on the post match, what you've got to understand is at the end of the day, we're very much just supporters of the football club and the performance and all that sort of thing, and we tend to go as crazy or as miserable depending on what's happening in the match. But it's quite a funny insight. A lot of people say, you're not showing any emotion. Well, you should have seen us 5 minutes ago. So
Chris, there was
it's
one
one it's one
time,
of those.
it was a few Christmases back, and we were doing the sort of the charity weekender, and
Mm.
it was a live watch along, and it was myself, Laura Bradburn, who I think you can see in the huddle breakdown now, and then in Big Tony
Mhm.
Haggerty. So the three of us were watching the game live, but I was about a minute behind them, right? And I'm a nightmare to watch football games with because I'm too excitable, and also because I was in the podcast, I was trying not to swear as well, right? So I was trying not to F and Jeff, but I'm jumping about, and then I see them celebrating. I go, "What's happening?" Oh, and I thought I can never do that. They spent most of the game. I don't. You can probably find it somewhere still on YouTube. They spent most of the game laughing at me reacting to things that they'd already reacted to. So I feel your pain, and after that, I thought, no for me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I think
but
that's why Paul John
just
was made up.
one of the
Yeah,
things
go ahead.
I wanted to pick up on as well, 'cause we mentioned Ingles, but the scales, and I think, and sorry if this is where you were going, but I've just seen a lot of people in the comments chanting, and I think, and this is that you talk about points that might get you harangued, but I think he's been our probably our best, most consistent player this season.
I would agree.
I think that I think that now that might be indicative of the fact we've not had a tremendous season, granted, right? I get it, but I think he's he's very rarely put a foot wrong. I think he's progressed as a player. I think he's become a bit of a leader in terms of that you can really hang your hat on his performances, and you can see like in particular last night. I thought he was absolutely excellent. I thought he was man of the match for me last night. I thought he
Yep.
was so solid domestically, defensively. I think that obviously there's sometimes the ball is given away, but I think he's always brave with it. He tries to keep it moving. I think he looks more comfortable under Martin O'Neill in terms of things are a bit easier. Just get the ball forward or pat it to somebody better. Don't try
Yep.
and do too much. And he looks to just be enjoying that. And actually, even when he went to left back, where he's played for the Republic a couple of times, I think he looked really good as well. Looked dangerous. Looked like he linked up well and in
Yep.
that left as well. And I think that when you consider that he was so maligned for so long, and I think everyone when he first went, right, we need a replacement. He's fine for just now. We need a replacement. Trusty comes in. No sure about Trusty, but we still need even better than a replacement. And it's almost like now people have sort of stopped criticising him,
Yep.
which sort of shows, I think, that people are starting to realise actually, and people maybe don't like admitting that they've changed their mind or whatever. But I think really, when you look at it, I don't think there's, and if I'm wrong, comments, I'm sure you'll tell me, but I don't think there's been any player as consistent or as reliable this season for Celtic
Yep.
than Big Liam. And I'm delighted for him because he's no stupid. You know, he obviously understands that for most of his time at Celtic, which is what, 4 years now?
About 4 years now. Yeah.
About
Yep.
4 years now. Um, that he's been sort of maligned and he's always been sort of punted out waiting for something better to replace him. Almost in a way like the way Greg Taylor was. He was always waiting
Yes.
for that first choice left back to come in and never did because he kept seeing them off. Um, and I think Scales has found himself in that mould, and I think it's really, really helped Trusty coming back into the team.
They
I
seem to have
think
a
it's
good
actually,
partnership, don't they? Yeah.
yeah, I think it's actually helped Tierney as well, if I'm
Hmm.
honest. Just their understanding that left hand side, and I think Tierney's been, and again, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think maybe he struggled with confidence a wee bit at times, and maybe the pressure of coming back and trying to be the old Tierney. Whereas I think he
Absolutely.
started to find a groove, and I think a lot of that has to be credit to Big Liam.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I'm really on board with the point. I think, Liam Scales, it would make a great story. And I think in years from now, I think the Liam Scales redemption story, as it were, given how his Celtic career started, I think will be something that everybody will look back on with fondness. And again, he, like many players, is going to face the challenge of potentially another manager coming in that has to try and impress all over again. But I don't think you can ever discount the amount of work that Liam Scales has put into his game. I don't think he's in the team by default now. I think that may have been the reason why he got the opportunity, was because we were struggling injury wise, and he was given that opportunity because we had to fill that position. But the onus is on the player to take the opportunity, and I think Liam Scales has done it. But let us know in the comments. Actually, do you agree with Brian and myself? Do you think Liam Scales has been one of the, if not the most consistent performer on the Celtic team? Is there another candidate that you might point to? And what do you think's been the reason for that? And now, do we finally put to bed the argument that Liam Scales is a centre back that we should try and replace? Do we put that to bed now and say, right, Liam Scales now has that jersey, it's his to lose, and it's going to take a hell of a challenge to displace him? Now, Brian, one of the things we want to talk about, we've spoken about individual players and how they've been performing recently, including the game last night. But one of the things that we want to talk about, because it's a tagline today, is it's all about legacy, and it's the legacy of Martin O'Neill. Now, this is a man who arrived at the club with one hell of a legacy already. He, there is a perception he was a bit of a break glass scenario. It was like, when you're under siege, as behind the scenes, the board members, recruitment, all these things, the previous manager, all these things were under a bit of attack by the Celtic supporters. So bring out the best shield you possibly can. Well, it's Martin O'Neill, right? But I think now, when you look at his record, and I can't get my notes back up now that I've finally managed to get things sorted again. Now, Martin O'Neill, since he's come in October, 6 games, 5 wins, no draws, and 1 loss, and it's the one we mentioned earlier, which is against Midtjylland. We've scored 16 goals in that time, and we've conceded 5. 3 of those were against Midtjylland, 1 was against Rangers, and 1 was last night against Feyenoord. So 2 goals in Europe, and 4 goals in Europe, and 1 against our biggest rivals. And domestically, we have looked unstoppable in terms of results. We had not a great performance. I think many people will talk about St Mirren. Martin, he was the first to acknowledge that and said we didn't use the ball well. But again, one of the things we've spoken about is mentality. That mental resilience, that ability to react when the chips are down. Against St Mirren, kind of going back to the days of Ange, we didn't stop. Kalmack pulls out an absolute worldie at the end of the match. Now, 19 plus minutes of the game were horrible to watch, and we were not happy with it. But ultimately, the scoreboard at the end said 1-0 Celtic. Fantastic. It's a great win. And now what he's done is he's given us a performance to be very, very proud of in Europe. Now, I've got something here that I want to read out because we do believe that we are coming up to the end of Martin O'Neill's current tenure, if all speculations are believed. So we might have one more match at the weekend. But This is Martin Neal book that was released in 2022. This is my signed copy by the great man, by the way, just right now. But there was a quote in here that I wanted to read out because I think it's pertinent to what might or how we might feel on at the weekend after the last game. And it talks about when he was leaving Celtic Park for the last time in his first tenure. And obviously, he wouldn't have chosen to leave, but it was largely to do with his wife Geraldine's health problems at the time, and the stress that was taken. So I think most of us would relate and understand that. But he says this. He said, "I have had the most enthralling time managing this institution called Celtic Football Club, and I believe I have restored the pride and passion that had disappeared for much of or rather that had remained dormant for much of its previous decade. At least that's what the Celtic fans tell me." Now, I think if you were to ask the Celtic fans, majority of us, after this tenure, this second tenure, what would be his legacy this time? Now, some people will say stability. Some people will say, steadying the ship. Some people will say giving confidence back. I don't think it would be unreasonable to say he's restored some of that pride and passion yet again, particularly after the challenging times we've had this season. So I'm keen to hear what people think in the comments, and we'll try and bring as many of them up as we can. But what will Martin O'Neill's legacy be, Brian, for you? If this is to be his last game at the weekend, what will be his legacy for him as a manager, and what could it mean for any new manager coming in?
Wow, so a lot to unpack there. So in terms of his legacy, I think, and I don't think I'm being out of order saying this, I think he's one of the top 5 most influential people to ever be a part of a Celtic Football Club. I think that when you look at when he came in, he completely transformed Celtic as in terms of a culture, in terms of a mentality, in terms of, and you look, that when he took over Celtic, we weren't the serial winners, we weren't, playing Europe every year, we weren't doing any of these things. And he took us and he changed the mentality against a very good Rangers side, by the way. And it was actually, he's such a class act. I remember it when he first came to Celtic, he said Rangers are the benchmark. They're who we need to be
Yes.
better than. They're the best team. We need to. It wasn't slide digs. He always classy. Always kept his own counsel, and I think that he changed that mentality. We started winning, and every manager since has sort of followed that mould, and it's been a huge cultural shift. And I think as well, for Martin O'Neill as a character, just that statesman like old school manager, just that real class act. Now we've had the privilege of meeting him personally,
Yep.
which I've rambled about ad nauseum because I love it and it was such a great night. But one of the things that I think anyone who has met him will tell you is he's such a nice man, so clever, so articulate,
100%.
and you can
Yep.
absolutely understand why players are so motivated by him. And some of the things I've noticed since he came back, and I was concerned when he came back because because look, fans are fickle, right? We're all fickle, every one of us, and I didn't want people to sort of turn on him if it went wrong. He spoke about his record there, 5 wins out of 6, really good performances for the most part, man aside, probably in Midtjylland.
Yep.
And I thought, what if it's a disaster if people were to turn around on him, and that would have been hard to watch. But I think
That was a fear. Yeah.
that was the fear, and I think that he's handled it absolutely superbly because we need to give some context as well to what he was walking into. It was a shambolic season. The football under Rodgers was poor, and I know I've not been the hugest fan of Rodgers, but you're miserable when Celtic aren't playing well. The
Yep.
thing that, as much as everyone's got different opinions and gives each other grief at times, we're all Celtic fans, and you're happy when Celtic win, you're sad when we lose, but it's just turgid to watch, and then you've got the board issues and all that madness going on, and it's really toxic. And then Martin O'Neill, 73 years old, not been a manager for years, risking his legacy to come back to steady the ship in the
Yep.
most toxic time and doing it with such class and aplomb. I just think it's incredible. I think if there was ever any doubt about his status as where he ranks in the sort of echelons a history with Celtic, I think he's as I say, he's definitely top 5, one of the most important people ever be at the club. And one other thing just to him before I get to your second point, which is a really good one about how it impacts the new manager.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that has wound me up a little bit is people saying, "Oh, he's speaking like an after dinner speaker, and he's been a bit too jovial, a bit too joking." That annoys me,
Yeah.
right? It annoys me a lot for a couple of reasons. One, leave the guy alone, right? Just he's a class act. He's dealing with the press his way. Relax. But I think it's a very clever tactic. I think he's known, right, this is doom and gloom. I'm going to come in, play it off lightly, sort of throw jokes, come across as affable, deal with the press, because the questions he's been fielding since he came in, often nothing to do with what's going on in the park. And he's feeding them with humour and class, and I think it's intentional. I don't think he does things by accident. I think
No.
and I think that with the first pod I was on after he was announced, I said people think he's very joking, very calm, and very collected. Martin, I mean, he's not here to lose games.
No. No. He's a
He's
winner.
not here to tolerate players being lazy or just steadying. He wants to win every game he's part of. Don't let him kidding on of, oh, I'll probably get sacked tomorrow, or I might be here next week. Or and you can see in the touchline, like last night, he was driving players on, giving them a rocket when it was needed. You could tell in St Mirren's performance, he looked furious in that touchline, and you don't
Yes.
want to be a player getting into that. So he's, for me, still an absolute giant of a man. Um, and therein lies the problem for Nancy coming in, because in a way, the new manager coming in almost had a sort of no lose situation, right? Because the
Yes.
club's in turmoil, the squad's not where it needs to be. It's been a terrible season. Fans are doom and gloom. The new guy comes in, kind of no matter what he does, as long as it doesn't have a disaster, he's going to get the time and the patience and the excitement. But then Martin Hughes came back, and he's galvanised that squad of players. A squad of
This is
players who,
exactly where I was going with this. Yeah, you've
right,
nailed it. You've nailed
a
it.
squad
Yeah.
of players who were, sort of flatlining almost throughout the season. He's galvanised them. He's restored a bit of pride in Europe. Again, I know Michelin, right? But I think we did beat even with a full strength team. They're a very, very
Yeah.
good side, Michelin.
Absolutely.
Last night's performance was just excellent. I mean, what a way to finish with a flourish. And then the new guy has to come in. He has to win the League Cup, rebuild the squad, play well, keep the momentum going, and deal with all these questions of this fight between the supporters and the fans. Martin O'Neill, in many ways, has helped the club. He's made a rod for Nancy's back.
He has, and I think that's it. I mean, there's two schools of thought. A lot of people saying, "Well, look, it's a clean slate for the players." Martin O'Neill has kind of pressed the reset button for a lot of players. We've mentioned players like Yang, Engels, Scales, for example. But they now have another opportunity to impress a manager. But I was looking at some of the fan reaction online last night, and there was a consistent message. It was like, "Why can't Martin stay? Can we keep Martin O'Neill?" And I think you're right. We've got what is undoubtedly a very, very good and promising up and coming coach and Wilfried Nancy. If the speculation is to be believed, he is the choice, and it's just a matter of formality now. And he's got that pressure because not only is he coming in to try and put his own stamp on the club, and listen, we'll absolutely get behind him as supporters. I think you can be cynical about the process that sits behind the appointment of manager or the recruitment of players, but once they're there and once they're in the dugout or wearing the hoops or he's got the suit on, whatever, we'll get behind him until he gives us reason not to. So I think he'll have a degree of support, but you're right. He's got this comparison now that's going to sit there where people are going to say, well, Martin O'Neill took this same squad of players and turned the season around essentially, and he has done. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to look at that, and we've got to give credit where it's due. Sean Maloney and I'm sure Mark Fotheringham played a part in that and all the staff. But that's quite a challenge for any manager coming in. Now, if you were Wilfried Nancy, Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you're Wilfried Nancy, and obviously at this point you've got no ties to Celtic Football Club, you've got no pre-existing legacy. There's no link there that any of us are aware of, and there's this incredible figure at the club at the moment in Martin O'Neill. Would you be looking to say, how can I leverage this guy's experience and this guy's knowledge? How can I leverage what this individual has done to try and galvanise a team? Or do you say, okay, thanks, Martin, really appreciate what you've got. It's my job now. I'm going to go and take it on. And is there a risk that if you do that, it's not only just about how you're perceived by the supporters, but the players have been speaking in such glowing terms about Martin O'Neill and what he's brought recently as well. Is there a risk that the manager comes in and upsets the apple cart so much that can have a detrimental effect on the players going forward?
So I suppose there's two scenarios. and I think I'm probably happy with either. So the first scenario is, so if it was me personally, I'd go, right, okay, what's your view? You're an icon of the club. You've been in charge in this turbulent period. What's your thoughts on the situation? I don't know what you know. If I'm asked these questions, how should I deal with it, with the press and stuff? What's the mentality of the players? Like, who needs an arm in the shoulder? Who needs a kick up the backside? I'd want to know and then take my own view in the back of that. However, I'm kind of all right if he comes in and goes, no, you've appointed me, you've asked me to be manager. I'm doing it my way, and it's the results are on me. And if it goes wrong, I'm to blame. And really hold on that responsibility. And I kind of, if that's the type of guy he is, I've got admiration for that because I kind of want someone to come in and go, right, this is what I'm doing, and it's on me. And the players are getting bored, or I'll get players that are going to get on board, but this is
Yeah,
how it's going to work. And if it goes wrong and he fails on his own steam, that's okay. You can hold your chest out and say, right, fine, I made mistakes, I did it my way, and that's it. Flip side of that is, if he comes in and it goes really well, then he can then take the credit. So I think either scenario is fine. I don't think it. I think Martin O'Neill was asked about it last night, and I think he said, "I'm happy to, give my opinion if he asks, but I'm not going to offer him advice." And I think that's the right approach because we don't know much about Nancy coming in, and but what I've seen, he certainly appears to be very much his own man, with his own sort of very, a lot of self belief and a lot of how he thinks the game should be played and the way it should be played. And if he comes in and says, "All right, thanks, Martin, this is good. It's my job now," and
yeah,
just puts the blinkers on and does it his way, I think you need to respect that and give the guy the time to see how he gets on. Um, but if it was me personally, I would probably want as much information as I
yeah,
could, as well as forming my own opinion. Um,
yeah.
but it remains to be seen what it's going to be like. But what I have to say about Nonsi coming in, if that's, because I think we've spoke about that, have we? We've spoken your
Well,
opinions on him coming in.
no, we've not touched on Nonsi yet, but I think it's certainly looking like it's almost a formality now that he'll be the manager. There's some speculation that he could be appointed or announced as early as today. I think that the general feeling is it's from a few
Monday,
sources
isn't it? I think.
likely to be Monday. I think, yeah, which I think is right because you don't want to have distractions when we've got a game at the weekend. So personally, I would like to see it announced on Monday if it's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, what's been your thoughts on the type of profile that the Nonsi brings to the table? I think if we put to one side everything that's been happening in the behind the scenes, the AGM, the debacle, all that kind of stuff, but actually, if we had a process that we had unbridled trust in, and we felt like the decision was the right one, would we look at Nonsi and think, yeah, that's a good progressive appointment. That's the way football's going. This is a man who, okay, he's early in his career, but he's shown a winning mentality already. And I sometimes think it doesn't matter what level you manage at. I think if you're a winner, you have to win at whatever level you're starting off at, right? And he's done that. So look, your trajectory has to go upward, and as it goes upward, it has to get more challenging. So yes, it's challenging, but what's your thoughts on someone like Nancy coming in as opposed to maybe a more experienced, tenured, and high-profile manager?
So I think we have to accept the reality in a way of the situation we're in at the moment. And I think that on paper, the Club Bruges manager would have been someone who you'd have wanted. You'd want the real high profile, the job he's done with that club, total autonomy. So I think it's unlikely we're going to get that because I think that one of the issues with Brendan was Rodgers was that sort of older school manager who wanted complete control in his way, but Celtic sort of had this, well, so we're told anyway, this system in place with Tisdale and the recruitment and it's going to be in a certain
Yep.
way, and those two things clashed. You have to have one or the other, and clearly it wasn't working under the sort of Rodgers, that sort of manager, for good or for bad, right? For me, I prefer, like a higher caliber manager in a way because then it shows the club's ambition and the experience at a certain level, etc. However, I think that if Nonsi comes in and basically he's used to working in a similar system where recruitment's done almost side of desk and he gets a bit
Yeah.
of advisory on it, and then coaches the players his way and brings through, then it might be the best fit for. It might be the best profile manager for the way the club's going.
Yeah.
If that's if indeed the plan and the strategy, and I think within that you have to say okay, give him the chance. Personally speaking, it obviously like it wouldn't have been Andy's first choice. Let's be honest about it, because no one heard of him before we started talking about him, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's fair.
However, I would also say the same about Ange, because I remember I just joined the pod just after Neil Lennon had been sacked, so before Ange came in. And I remember it was announced, and I remember it said at the time, I'm quite excited because I think that this is something different and it's
Yes.
something unusual. And everyone was doing their YouTube research as we're wanting to do, and we're looking at the way Angie's teams played, and we went, all right, okay, this might be quite exciting scene. And I think um, Wilfred Nancy's teams seem to play that way as well. That's sort of exciting football, and I think what he may bring is maybe the MLS is an untapped market. So we may get some sort of Hatate, Maida-esque players from the MLS we've never known about before. So there's plenty to be excited about. I think that we kind of have to go over the manager profile thing, because unless it goes really, really wrong, I think we're going to look at these type of data-driven managers moving
Yeah.
forward. It's almost like, to paraphrase the Dark Knight, it's not the hero we deserve, it's the hero we need right now, or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
he
think that's
he
right.
he might be that guy that comes in and actually and does a really good job and takes us forward. And as you said, regardless of what's going on, when he comes in, when he's on that touchline, we're going to support him, we're going to cheer him on, and
Yeah.
hopefully it goes well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a great perspective. I think it's sometimes there's a fear of the unknown. There's a fear of like, oh God, it's risk. But you're right. I mean, Ange came with significantly more experience. He had managed at different levels, international experience, etc. So there was probably a lot more on paper that Ange brought to the table. But still, at the same time, it was an appointment that I think, until it was announced or he was formally linked, which was very quick, actually, after the Howe speculation kind of disappeared. None of us really knew anything about him, and I don't know if we went in there with, there might have been a degree of excitement, but I'm not sure there were particularly high expectations. I don't think we thought we were going to get the Ange ball that we got. I don't think we were going to get exciting, high-scoring football that we got. So that was a real pleasant surprise. So what you're hoping is Nancy comes in, and I think it could be maybe a wee bit dangerous to compare him too much to Ange, because people might suddenly expect that same level of football straight away. But there is the potential that he comes in and he brings something we haven't seen before, because it is probably, if you look back over the last 5 or 6 years, it's the first time we've really appointed an up-and-coming manager, as opposed to someone who, maybe presents less risk in terms of what they've achieved before. I mean, Brendan was, a proven winner both at the club and out with the club. Neil Lennon had been in and around the club and had a previous tenure as well. Ange, okay, first time at our club, but had, substantial experience, as we say, both domestically and in Europe, so internationally as well. So, this it could go both ways, right? I mean, we have to be realistic about it. Nancy comes in, the pressure to win at Celtic is almost immediate. Most former managers have spoken about that. You're only a couple of games or a couple of losses away from a crisis, but he's coming in with a squad that actually, based on last night's evidence, have proven that they can compete. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up, Brian's, I want to get your thoughts on something. Now, I'm not going to go back to all the AGM stuff and the statement was made by Ross Desmond. I mean, I think you've given your thoughts. I think most of the folks in Acsom have given their thoughts. I've got my thoughts, which I'll hold my tongue. Otherwise, I might end up swearing on the pod. But there was one statement that he made as part of one portion of that statement he made, which I think caused me the most concern, outside of the unjustified attack on Celtic fans, etc. The one thing he mentioned was really in relation to our European aspirations, talking about how challenging it is, how the market has changed, how it's very difficult for a club of our stature to continually progress without, potentially putting ourselves in jeopardy. Well, not only have we seen precedents with teams like Michelin, Bruges, we've seen lots of teams of a similar profile, maybe even less of a profile than our club, but we also saw last night with what I think most people would agree is a severely depleted squad, that we can actually go and compete against European teams. And what it takes is a bit of belief. And you wonder how much further could we go if the club did back for European progression? And is that something that really a manager like Nancy, you're hoping he's going to come in and demand? Because he can't, surely his level of ambition is not just to come in and win the league. He'll want to get Celtic back to a strong position in European football. Surely he's looking back at what we achieved last season and saying that's the benchmark. That's where I want to be.
Well, if you're a manager of any sort of decent caliber, you want to show your skills against the best, and the best is in the Champions League, right? So I think that in a way, it's a sort of, I think that the manager, if they're given the right tools, can sort of almost supersede what the board sees. So the board are going to be happy with, you're in Europe, you get the money for Europe, that's it. It doesn't really matter how you do, you're just happy to be there. But I think, you know, and again, sorry to bring him up again, but you look at Ange, and he basically said, we play our football as best as we can, and we play it against who we like. We played against Real Madrid, Parkhead, lost 3-0. It was an amazing game to watch. Loved it because we were so brave and the ball went for it.
Yep.
And I think his plan was just that incremental building of the players that he had at his disposal. I don't think, and also I could be wrong, that there was too much of, we need to get this type of player, we need to get that. It was almost like, what have I got? How do we play? Can we build on this? And can we have the system and the performance is the thing that drives us forward? And you hope Nancy does a similar thing, just concentrates on what we can do well, what he can control. Because ultimately, managers can only work with what they've got and
Yep.
the tools are given. You can only influence what you can influence, and all he can influence is the performances on the park. And I suspect, and I think Kev Graham and I, in one of our first ever conversations in the pod, which feels like it must be nearly 5 years ago. Must be, because you two, nearly 5 years, madness. We said, if you prepare to compete in Europe, domestically will take care of itself.
Yes.
If you're playing against your Firelords away and you're brave on the ball and you're playing well and you're competing, domestic football will take care of itself. So I think that the best thing we can do as fans and as the manager is kind of that it almost doesn't matter about the boards. We can't affect that now as much as we're trying,
Yes.
and we all hope it changes, but we can't change that. The manager's not going to change that. We have to just hope that he goes, right, this is what I've got, this is what I'm working with, how do I optimise it? How do I get the maximum out of the system of what's been working? And if we can do that, we'll have great success. If we can't, then the question marks will be raised again on, okay, how is this going to work moving forward? And it sounds passive to say, but it's almost a sort of watch and brief and a sort of wait and see approach on it, because we kind of have to say, well, let's see how he does. Let's see how the recruitment goes. Let's see what type of managers. Let's see what the challenges are, and then see how we can go. But I think again, maybe because it's Friday, maybe because last night was so good, I'm positive about it, because I think that we've got someone new, an unknown, which is exciting in itself. We don't know what players he's going to like, what players he's not going to like, what system he's going to play, how that's going to adapt well. Is it going to be someone that brings academy guys through? And what does that mean for guys like Dane Murray, Donovan? What does it mean for guys like maybe Engels, who've underperformed a bit? Guys like Maeda, maybe you really like the way he plays, maybe you want to stay. There's so many unknowns that I think we should draw excitement from instead of trepidation.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm actually loving the positivity, and I'm going to bring up some of the comments which are echoing that. This one popped up, which I absolutely love. Tanner Ball Dribbler, which is a great username. Great show, boys. Set me up for the weekend nicely. Festive tunes and beer incoming already. Well, it's early.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere, Chris. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, mate.
5 o'clock. Absolutely. It's always happy or somewhere. But no, that's great. Well, I hope you have a good weekend as well. And thanks for supporting the channel. Stephen Stewart comes in, to say he can't be coming here to be a yes man. Well, to be honest, and we're limited in what we know about Nancy the man and Nancy the manager, but all indications that I've seen says that he is someone who comes in with a set of requirements and comes in with certainly a few prerequisites that he wants, whether it be coaching staff, whether it be, style of play. So I don't get the impression that he would be a yes man, but I think at the same time, we have to be realistic and understand that anyone who comes to the club is going to have to play under set parameters, right, Brian? I mean, they're going to be subject to what we're capable of doing, what the appetite to recruit and spend is going to be. And as you say, a manager's job has to go beyond that. Sometimes as a case of saying, okay, this is what I've got to work with. How can I get the best out of that? And I think, that was one of the criticisms that, we don't like to criticise former managers, but that was one of the criticisms I did label at Rodgers at times, was that, okay, look, the situation is what it is. I think there's a lot of shared frustration, but if this is now the squads and the team you've got to work with, surely part of a manager's job is to elevate that squad to the highest level you possibly can and find a way. I think the term I used last night was formula. Find the right formula to get the best possible performance out of the players. So you're hoping that if Nancy comes in, that he can do that. And I think Martin O'Neill was a good example of someone who actually, I think, in a short time has been able to do that. Franny 892 comes in and says, according to this board, we have a ceiling. Is it time to crash the ceiling? I think, look, I think you have to temper frustration with realism, right? I mean, the board and, by extension, the key shareholders are, they are involved in the processes behind the football operation. We want change, but I think change has to be realistic. We're not going to have the board removed. That's not going to happen. I don't think we're going to see the majority of the principal shareholder, sell up. I don't think that's going to happen. So what does meaningful change represent now? And what's realistic change? What can it represent? Brian, here's a question I'm going to ask, and it's one that I'm keen to get the thoughts of the folks in the chat as well on this. But I'll get your thoughts first. If we were to take the view that Dermot Desmond is the de facto owner of Celtic at the moment and is acting in an operational fashion, right? And that may or may not be the case, right? We will never know that for sure, but that's our perception at the moment. And we've got executives in place, the CEO, the CFO, etc., who are the chairman, who are making decisions. Now, they're coming under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of criticism at the moment, right? And we've all got our own opinions on that. Let's say, and we'll take the assumption that it's Nancy that's coming in. Let's say Nancy comes in, manages to continue the good work that Martin O'Neill's done with the squad. Some players get a clean slate. Yang, for example, we might see players like Maeda decide that, I quite like what this manager's bringing to the table. I want to stay now beyond January. And we do some strong recruitment in January. So we see a degree of backing for the manager, right? And actually what I'm saying is we start to see the football club being run the way we wanted the football club to be run. Does it take away the issues between the supporters and the board? Does it? I know it will deflect from that, but does it eradicate them entirely, or is there a lot more work that has to be done on both sides to try and repair this relationship?
So I think it's a good point. I think that what you saw, so for the past X amount of years, there's been a cohort of Celtic fans, myself included, who've constantly criticised the board, not just for the sake of criticising the board, it's for saying, well, what's the strategy? Where's the transparency? What is this plan? One of the things they spoke about in the past is, we know we've made mistakes. All right, good. What mistakes specifically? What are you referring to? How have you fixed them? What's the mitigators for
what's the
do
plan
it again,
to
right?
address them?
What's the plan, right?
Yes.
So that's always been in the background, regardless if it's been Ange absolutely smashing it and everybody happy or not. What I think you saw recently is, because on the park it's been so poor at points, there's a bigger amount of fans being vocal about the criticism. I think if, to your point, everything goes really, really well and it's on the face of it, we're functioning really well as a club and having success, I think that portion of the fans will sort of be less vocal about the board, because they'll feel, well, look, I just want to watch football, I'm not really interested, which is fair enough, right? Because football should be escapism. It's just maniacs like us who make it a life and want to talk about it all the time, but football should just be escapism and should be entitled to go, fed up hearing about the board, I just want to watch the game. That's your right, and fair play to you. So there'll be an element of fans of that, but there'll also still be that core, probably like most of ourselves, who still want these answers, who still think we should be doing better, who are interested in that corporate working. So I think that you may see the level of toxicity dilute a little bit, and the comparison would be the COVID season versus Ange's season.
Absolutely.
That everyone going nuts, protest, the signs. Ange comes in, football's really good. Ange is an absolute statesman. everyone loves the players that come in. You get big handsome Matt O'Reilly in if they that cheers everybody up, right? You start to sort of the anger dissipates a little bit, but the
Yeah,
core issues are still there. So I think that long way to answer your question, but I suspect that if everything goes well in the park, some of the anger will dissipate, but the core fundamental issues with the board and the sort of supporter base who feel they're running it inadequately will continue. But I think probably the level or the sort of the volume of criticism towards the board will dilute somewhat.
yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. Keen to get some of the comments and just hear what people think of that. Would your thoughts and your maybe your resentment of the board, would it continue? Would it stay at the same level? Or is this something that can be repaired? And is the best way to repair that through, seeing progress on the park? And the manager really putting his own stamp on the team and helping to drive us forward. Or has it gone too far at this point? So asking the question, not going to provide an opinion one way or another at this point, but I think just understanding that. That strength of feeling amongst the support. I'm going to bring in Andy Lee here. Any strategy that depends on Sevco being in constant shambles is deeply flawed. They have to get it together. At some point, surely, not sure about the last point there, but we'll leave that to interpretation. Let's see here.
I
This
think
is one. Yep.
just on that point, just on that previous point, just before you move on, I think that is fundamental. I think it's sort of, and it goes back to my other point about what are sort of the measuring stick for success is, like, what are our KPIs? So for
Yes.
whoever the new manager is coming in, what does he see as, what does good look like? And for me, good as a minimum, regardless of what the system is, what the board does, it has to be, can we compete in Europe against teams of a similar league size, similar budget size? And can we compete well, and can we punch above our weight on occasion? If we can do that, it doesn't matter if it's Hearts, if it's
Yep.
Rangers, if it's Hibs, if it's Motherwell, it doesn't matter domestically. We need to compete against the level above us all the time. If you're a boxer and you're sparring, you always spar with somebody better, because you learn. You get a few black eyes, but eventually you get less black eyes, and then you get better. Then you move on to somebody else that's better than you. If you're
Correct.
doing any sort of job at any role in any company, you start off, you learn from somebody that's better. You aspire to raise your game. We have to do that regardless of who it's against. So I think that it's not necessarily, our neighbours across the city that the measuring stick. It's, are we preparing for to dominate domestically, or are we preparing to compete in Europe? And that's the
Yep.
fundamental question. The teams that are ahead or behind us, I think, with the greatest respect, are largely irrelevant to how we should be gauging ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think that's a fair point. Brown Warrior comes in to say, Chris, am I in the Acsom naughty step? Well, you're not, but all I'm going to say is behave. Which seems to be
Very,
the
very
comment.
Peter Law of you, Chris. Very Peter Law
Yes,
of you.
absolutely. Behave you will be. Absolutely. I mean, Pete McGee comes in to say, sack the board, Desmond's out. I mean, I think, again, I understand the sentiment. I just think it's not realistic. I think, what we have to do is find a way to help enact change, which is positive for the football club. But I do understand the strength of feeling. John Ford comes in to replace the board along with Tisdale. Well, I think it's. I think there's an argument to be made that is there enough accountability over certain failures, and as we said, Brian, the board have acknowledged in that video that failures or errors were made. But you're right, it's about acknowledgement is one part of it. It's about what are you doing to resolve or remediate those mistakes. And I think
Well, the thing
that's
about it is, Chris,
what we
see at the
want.
moment, see at the moment, you're right, but at the moment the board can say, we've set up Tisdale to do this role. This is how we want the club to function. Rogers was the blocker, right? Whether that's true or not, that's what they can say. That's what Dermot Desmond essentially said. It was all his fault. It's all Brenda's fault. It's all his fault.
Yeah.
I don't believe that for a second, by the way.
No,
But
me neither.
that was the narrative, right? And this is why I think a guy like Nonsi coming in is going to be telling. Is there's no place to hide at that point. If God forbid it goes wrong, and he's doing everything by what they're saying is their structure, they can't blame anybody else anymore. They're going to
Yeah.
have to be accountable. And,
Yes.
you know, going back to your earlier point, and I know we're running out of time, so I won't ramble on too long, but in terms of things being fixed, right, there's always a scenario where things can be repaired, relationships can be repaired, right? Unless
Absolutely.
it's very, especially in somewhere like football, right? And the board, and we know you're watching, someone from Celtic FC, just communicate better. Just communicate, right? It's a simple, just be transparent and communicate, because the perspective is, and I'm talking to you directly, you look as if you're holding the fans in complete contempt and do not care and do not
Correct.
consider respect us enough as people to be forthright. It doesn't matter if we necessarily agree, because not everyone's going to agree. It
No.
matters that you communicate. What's the plan? How have you fixed the mistakes? What's next? Just communicate better. That will go a long, long way to repairing. And if you couple that with good performances on the park, I think things will get better. That being said, I still think, look, back the team, don't like the what's going on behind the scenes. I think that's kind of most people's view at the moment. That might
Yeah.
no change. But what you do is you can then justify, well, why are we getting criticised? We've been transparent. We've laid out the plan. Yada yada yada. It makes those sort of discerning voices a bit more, or discontent voices a bit less validated. Whereas at the moment, that radio silence validates everything we've been saying. So I think that's how you could maybe bridge that gap. But irrespective, the thing's simple. And last night's a great example. There's no better feeling in the world than watching Celtic win. Everything
Absolutely.
else is secondary, right? You love that. It's brilliant, and that's what we all want. We're going to cheer on the team. We're going to cheer on the manager. We hope things get better at board level. There's fan groups that are demanding it, and rightly so. But all we can do is control what we can control, and that's what happens in the park, and watching it and enjoying it, and being respectful to each other. And if we can do that, we can get back to enjoying the football, I think.
I think very, very well said, very well articulated as well. Yeah, I would completely agree. I think for me, Celtic fans are the absolute lifeblood of the club. And there's an old business term that me and you know, Brian, it's called KYC. It's know your customer right now. I never refer to Celtic fans as customers, but I think when it comes to a football context or the running of a football club, know your supporters. Know your supporters. Know what they respond to, what they react to, what will get them on your side. We're not complicated individuals when it comes to our support of the football club. We want what's best for the football club. We want to see progress. We want to see improvement. We want to see investment. We want to see everybody pushing in the same direction. And for me, if you want to demonstrate strong leadership, and again, similar to Brian, I'll talk directly to the board here because as we suspected, I'm sure they park everything for 12:30 on a day, Brian, and stick a TV on and watch us. But
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Absolutely. But what I would say, if you want to demonstrate strong leadership, lead from the front and pull your troops behind you. Pull them along with you. Don't stick them in the barracks and leave them there. Pull them with you. And that's the way I would view it. So, listen, we have gone over time, Brian, but it's been a cracking discussion. Really appreciate you coming on and joining me on a Friday. We've been upwards of 1,800, 1,900 strong on the feed, which is fantastic. Some great comments there. A few naughty words, so unfortunately I can't bring in. This keeps coming up, and I'm going to ask this, and it says, "DD, who's your hairdresser?" Now I'm assuming he's talking about me, not Dermot Desmond. Does this look like I go to a hairdresser? No. If anyone's a movie buff, if you've ever seen that scene in The Omen where they try and take the kid to church, and then he freaks out, that was me going to the hairdressers, by the way, and I'm still like that. So no, I tell you what I'll do. I'll get my hair cut the next time we're in a European final. How's about that for a challenge? So we'll do that one. But no, listen, it's been a cracking discussion. It's been a great one for a Friday. Paul John will be back over the weekend to cover the game. It'll be hopefully a tremendous send off, Brian, for Martin O'Neill. And any man who can build on such a fantastic legacy is going to go down as an absolute Celtic legend. And we, of course, at Acsom wish him all the best for not only that game but for any of his endeavours going forward. And it'd be great to see him continue to have a strong association with the club. All that's left for me to say is, Brian Digney, thank you very much for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind. Everyone have a great weekend. Farewell.